Today I'm not outside in my regular garden, but I'm inside in my indoor garden. This structure is where I do my starts in the winter before I can put everything out, but it's also where I keep my worms. I decided after 3 years of gardening to start vermicomposting with worms because I wanted to try to be more self-sufficient in my yard and not have to go to other sources for compost and worm castings. So I have 4 regular totes. 2 have vermibag totes in them and 2 are just open totes. These 2 are migrating right now, and what I mean by migrating, I actually have dumped them into these trays, and I have a bait tray inside that I'm collecting the worms from the castings. This has been doing this for like 2.5 weeks on both of these trays. So I'm almost to the point where I can sift them and take them out to the garden. So today, I am only feeding 3 of my bins, these 2, and then my 5th bag is a Vermibag mini over here, which I'll be feeding as well. All right, so I figured I'd start recording videos about my vermicomposting as well, since all of the people that I used to watch who vermicomposted, I don't see many of them doing videos anymore. And if you're anything like me, when I started, I was always looking for information. So the types of worms that I have a mix. I have night crawlers, European night crawlers, and I have perionyx, which are called blue worms, and I have regular red worms, your red wigglers. This bin was recently restarted in April with a mixture of them, so you can see some sitting on the top here. With my bins, I'm someone who believes in fluffing. I need to see what's going on, if the food's been eaten, if it hasn't, how much is left, because for me, that's the indicator of a healthy bin and whether I'm going to feed the worms this week or skip a week. In my bins, I use a mixture of cardboard and cocoa core mostly. When I start my bins, I'll put in some coffee grounds, spent coffee grounds, and eggshell. But when I add to the bin, I'm just putting more cocoa core and cardboard. Now in this bin, it's getting close to harvest again for this one, but it still has a ways to go. There's some food.
So what determines when you harvest as opposed to just let it keep going?
These pieces of cardboard and food that you see, if they're all gone and the worms have eaten through it, that's a good indicator of it's time to harvest. If it's full, if there's a large volume of stuff as well, and it's all, no particles in there, that's a good indicator of being time to harvest. So we're almost there with this one, although I could also add more to it. I usually put a good handful of food right in a section. Sometimes I forget where I've put it last, but I try to rotate 3 sections so that the worms move through and get to all areas. If you feed one area all the time, the worms are just going to stay over here, and this areas are not going to be composted. So I'm feeding right here. That should be enough considering they have a lot of cardboard bedding in there and some food scraps from previous. I also add in some grit. I use eggshell, diatomaceous earth, neem cake, coffee grounds. Not always coffee grounds, but definitely the things that I just mentioned. And then once I'm done, I just cover it back up, smooth it out. And then what I found with these Vermibag totes, they tend to be on the dry side no matter how much you put into them. So I will use bubble tape, but before I cover it, I want to just grab this because it's sitting up top. If you've never seen a cocoon, this one's empty, but this is what the cocoons look like. They start off really, really yellow and then get this amber color before hatching. But this one already hatched, and that's good. When I first started, I had worms for like 2 months. Could never find a cocoon, thought my worms were dying. And then just one day, it was like a whole bunch of cocoons in there. So seeing that does make me happy. And then you always want to check your gloves after, because you'll get hitchhikers. Sometimes the baby worms will hitch a ride on your gloves, so you don't want to carry them. Now this bin is the second bin. It's the same start as the other one. I restarted this in April. And it's got a cocoon, another spent cocoon right up here. The worms like to hang out on the bubble wrap for air, so I find it pretty cool when you can see them hanging up top. This guy right here is a red wiggler, and I can tell because red wigglers tend to be listless. Even though they're not, they tend to only move when they need to. Put this guy back. All right, so do the same thing. As you look at it, you see underneath that layer of cardboard, there's really mostly composted cocoa core. There's not a lot of cardboard in here, but there's some food scraps. This looks like a remnant of a banana. But I like to mix it all in to make sure that there aren't large pockets of food which could attract unwanted bugs into your bins. You're gonna have bugs in your bin. No matter how hard you try, there's a beetle that comes into the bin that loves to compost, and those are fine just as long as their numbers aren't enormous. But one thing that I wasn't aware of was how many other bugs you'll find in your bin, good and bad, while doing this. Having the Vermibag definitely helped cut down on the gnats. And what I'm doing right now is just collecting the larger food items so I can put them together with what food I'm giving now. Things trying to collect. You can put just about anything in your worm bins except for citrus. I occasionally will put some citrus, but you don't want a whole bunch of citrus in the bin. I don't put grapes in the bin. I don't put onions or garlic in my bins. And if I can save anyone, I also do not put cabbage in the bin. I did that one time, and the next week it smelled like some extreme gas. It wasn't pleasant, to say the least. But as you can see in this one, I'm feeding over here. I'm not sure where I did my last feeding, so I'm gonna feed over here this time. And I'm gonna sprinkle the grit in. I initially thought it would be gross having worms when I heard people talk about composting with worms, and this is a night crawler. I was like, oh, I didn't want worms. I couldn't think about having worms in the house. I thought it would be gross. I thought it would smell. The cool thing about vermicomposting is that it really only smells if you put something like cabbage or broccoli in, or if your bin is off. If your bin is smelly, something's wrong. So it's a great way to get rid of additional food waste. And if you're a gardener like me, have compost for the garden. And finally, the Vermibag Mini. I can't say for certain if I am completely sold on the flow through style of bag. It does have its benefits in that it holds a lot, but I never know if it's really composted or not. So I have this one, and I put a lot into this one. I will admit, my knowledge for my bins largely comes from binging on videos by the crazy worm lady, who unfortunately got sick a few years back and she stopped making videos. But her videos were really informative, and how I run my bins is close to how she runs her bins. She inspired me to get smaller bins instead of the larger bins. I feel like the smaller ones are easier to maintain than the larger ones. And then I also watched another YouTuber, but unfortunately as well, after COVID, she stopped making videos. So I'm not sure where these people are, but they greatly inspired me to change some of my practices in my bins. And I can't say that what they suggested led me wrong. Now, what's the difference between the flow-through bin and my other bins is that I don't dig in the flow-through. I turn over the top just to make sure the top doesn't have a lot of food, but I don't dig far underneath. I probably go as far as about a handful and turn that over, and that's it. Anything else underneath that, I leave alone. So with this one as well, how I feed it is different since I don't turn over. So I spread the food all over on this one. Having just talked about cabbage, I didn't have enough food prepared, so I gotta put some coleslaw in here to give them something. But I'm prepared for the smell. But if you don't like this smell of gas and don't want a bin that might smell tart for a week, definitely don't put cabbage in. And then, just the same, I sprinkle it with some grit. And then, what I do after is just kind of tuck it in with the other material this. And then cover it back up. So after I fed them, usually I give it a full 7 days. I won't open the bags, I don't mess with them, I don't do anything. I let them go for another week. And then depending on how much food is left, I'll either add more food to the bin than the last time to make sure that they are getting enough for the week. Or like I said, I'll check it and I might not add any food. But as I restart these, I'll go along and show you the process from the beginning of a bin to get an idea of what you should expect to see with your worms, any issues we might come across, because even though I've been doing this for 2 years, you can still have a disaster. This winter, for some reason, my bins were running dry and I didn't pay attention because I had so much going on with new stuff I was trying in the garden. And I wasn't sure what was going on with my bins, and I really wasn't paying attention because I was busy. I had projects for things new that I wanted to start in the outdoor garden and wasn't really paying attention to my bins. So 2 of my bins went dry, like the whole colony dried out because the bins were dried out. And with worms, you don't catch dead worms. They just dissolve into the media. So I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. So these 2 bins totally got restarted in January. So I will definitely take you along in the journey so you can kind of see what happens, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. But that is my vermicompost setup in the indoor garden. Oh, one last thing. The indoor garden houses my aloe. And if she sprouts a flower, because we got a flower this winter, if she sprouts a flower this year, I will be impressed. But she's rehabbing. I had to take off a bunch of leaves and support the stem because it started growing crooked due to the light source. So she's doing really good, needs to be watered. And with the aloe, that is once a month that I water the aloe. But that's all for today.